And this is part of the Bike Week 2020, supported by the Galway City Council through the Active Travel Initiative of the Government of Ireland. A little bit about the Galway Cycling Campaign. We're a group of volunteers who want to get people cycling for everyday journeys in Galway City and County. We want people of all ages and all abilities to be able to cycle safely from their front door to wherever they want to go home and come again home safely. This afternoon's special lunchtime webinar is about how bike parking and business together can be mutually beneficial, and I'm delighted to welcome our 4 guest speakers. I'll give each an introduction as we go through, but just to let you know, I'm very delighted to welcome His Excellency Adriaan, Ambassador at the Netherlands Embassy to Ireland, Chris Buntlett from Dutch Cycling Embassy, Richard Guiney, CEO of Dublin Town, and Clodagh Callanan of the Development Studies Association of Ireland. You're all most very welcome. I would now like to introduce you to the Ambassador. We are very delighted to have him here with us this evening. He's been Ambassador to Ireland since February 2019. He has a long career in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Prior to being here in Dublin, he was Deputy Head of Mission in Warsaw, and has previously headed up the East Asian Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in The Hague. And he was the EU Presidency Coordinator for the Netherlands in the early 2000s. Ambassador, you're most welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted for you to share some of the lessons of bike culture to us here in Galway and in Ireland.
Thank you, Martina. I will first say a few things about cycling in the Netherlands, and then I will go into some trends and finish with a few lessons learned on bicycle parking. Now, in the Netherlands, we have about 22 million bikes for 17 million people, and very different from the situation here in Ireland. And about 25% of all the traffic movements is by bike. And we use it to go to school, to the office, to recreational areas, and to go shopping. And we start as young. As a kid, I always went by bike to school. And at primary school, we even have a traffic exam to show our knowledge of the traffic rules. And basically what is learned in the cradle is carried to the tomb. Now, biking parking is only the end point of the cycling infrastructure. And what makes people cycle and what makes cycling routes attractive is basically 2 things. First, can I get somewhere quickly? Secondly, is it safe? And the same applies basically to bicycling parking. Cyclists want it easily available near the shops, free of charge, dry and secure. And that's something that we're doing in the Netherlands. And when I look at the behavior of people in the Netherlands and their shopping behavior, I basically three trends, 3 important trends. The first is how we shop. In Holland, I take the car to do my regular weekly shopping, and I would walk or go by bike if I just needed a few things. And linked to that is the recreational element of shopping. In the past, we went to the shop, parked in front, bought what we needed, and went home again. Nowadays, you go some shopping with the idea of what you might want. You do some window shopping, you have a drink, get some food in a restaurant, and then you continue again. It's all more recreational. And you go to the shop either by car, if you live far away, or if you need something very big, or you go by bike. And shops basically adjusted the bicycle parking to that. The second important trend has to do with traffic management. Public space is scarce, and cities and towns, big and small, want to be safer and visibly more attractive. And governments want to reduce traffic jams and reduce carbon emissions. And they combine car-free zones in the center, parking zones at the edge of the center, and better accessibility and public transport. And from there, basically from the edge of the center, you walk and sometimes you bike. And basically they increase the overall accessibility and attractiveness of cities by combining different modes of transport, and the modular approach, so-called. And as government, we ensure that the bicycling parking matches that approach. The third important trend is the link between transport to work and transport to go shopping. If you go by public transport and or bike to the office, you're likely to do much more shopping by bike. For example, in the Netherlands, my ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, does not have any car parking spaces for its staff. It does have a substantial bike parking and is located next to the central station. So my work basically forces me to come to the office by bike and therefore shop more by bike. Now, not every city is the same. And in Amsterdam, for example, very few people in the city center ever use a car. Parking is difficult, and you can do almost anything by bike or on foot. In Rotterdam, where I studied, the city setup is different, and you have areas where people live, areas where people work, areas where people shop, and you adjust the bicycle parking to that. And yet, where cities and towns may differ in size and or design, a number of lessons are universally applicable. For example, we see movable bicycle decks rising everywhere. Here in Dublin, but also in my hometown in the Netherlands, where there are only 25,000 people. It's an ideal, cheap instrument to see if certain infrastructural changes work. And we also see a modular approach to transport, to combine units of train, bus, car, and or bike to get to places. And the adjustments made to the infrastructure of cities and towns, big and small, to stimulate that. Finally, there's basically no one size fits all. And you have to measure, experiment, adapt to the local circumstances. And the consultation process for that is key. In Netherlands, we have a national cycling plan, for example, and where all stakeholders are meeting from opposite sides, basically with one goal: to find the best solution for the greater good of society. And that is possible because, in my view, bicycle parking and car parking are not competing with each other, but they are complementary to each other. They cater to different people, different times, under different circumstances. Now, and with that, I'd like to close my introduction.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm really struck by your concluding remarks that this is possible and that it's not about competition necessarily within our public spaces, but, as you say, complementary uses of public space, what we use and when we use it. Thank you so much for that and for being with us here today. I'd now like to introduce Chris Bruntlett, who is a Marketing and Communication Manager at the Dutch Cycling Embassy. This is a public-private partnership that represents the best knowledge, experience and experts from the Netherlands. As a long-term campaigner in Vancouver, he fell in love with Dutch bike culture, and in 2016 it inspired him to co-author the book Building the Cycling City, the Dutch Blueprint for Urban Vitality. Chris uses his knowledge and passion to share practical lessons for global cities wishing to follow their footsteps and become better places to live, work and, of course, cycle. Chris, you are very welcome to join us here, inverted commas, in Galway this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Martina. It's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. Greetings from Dutch Cycling Embassy headquarters in Utrecht in the Netherlands. I myself live in Delft, and this is a photograph of my local grocery store in Delft. So a lot of the examples I draw from today are actually going to be at the city of Delft, and it's for good reason. I think there's a lot of parallels to Galway in that it is a smaller city of about 90, 100,000 people, large student population and medieval town center. The key difference is how people get around. Nearly 50% of all trips in the city are made by bicycle, and just 20% are made by car. But as we go through this, hopefully I can share some practical lessons for how Galway can get started and through the years and the decades, hopefully achieve Delft levels of success in the not too distant future. So I'll start out by just introducing the Dutch Cycling Embassy. We're an organization that's been around for about 10 years, a public-private partnership between the national government here in the Netherlands and about 70 different organizations that work in the field of cycling. They are private consultants, public enterprises like municipal governments, even the national rail operator is a part of our organization, and they're all looking to export their knowledge and expertise in cities and countries around the world. So we help them to export the decades of knowledge that they have built up over the years through building this cycling nation that exists here in the Netherlands. That mission has been, at least pre-COVID, was two-pronged in that we would host a lot of study tours, international delegations that would come to Dutch cities to study the cycling conditions and learn from see what's possible and bring some of those ideas and concepts back to their city And then we inversely would travel to those places, bringing teams of Dutch experts to deal with specific challenges that they are occurring in their city, and help them to learn from the Dutch engineers and transport planners and policymakers. Post-COVID, we've obviously not been able to do a lot of travel or face-to-face contact, so we've shifted to predominantly digital means, but we're still doing a lot of workshops, virtual study tours, and obviously webinars in this new digital age that we're living in. Whenever we start working with a new city, we always ask the first question, which is, why do you want more cycling in your city? It should not just be cycling for cycling's sake, but cycling towards a larger end goal. And that can be anything from affordability, livability, sustainability, equity. These are lofty goals that a lot of cities are working towards, and cycling can be used as a tool to achieve some of those goals. We're going to focus mostly on the economics of cycling today, but don't forget that those other topics are just as important, if not more so, especially in the year 2020. Lots of studies out there showing how cycling is beneficial to the economy. It's not just the extra money that everyone that cycles has in their back pocket to spend at their local shops and businesses, but also how larger society gains when somebody chooses to get on a bicycle instead of getting in a motor vehicle, in terms of the congestion, the pollution, the public health gains that come with getting more people cycling more often. One thing that's not mentioned here, and perhaps more cities are beginning to discover, is the opportunity for city branding, and attracting international businesses, talent to their region by creating these enticing conditions for their staff to commute by bicycle. And there are now a lot of cities around the world that are building cycling in an effort to attract the best talent from around the world to relocate to their city. So when we're asked how can we get started on this journey, we often dive right in and talk about infrastructure, and there's no doubt that infrastructure is the first thing that any city should be tackling. I know we're talking about bike parking, but it cannot be viewed in isolation. And so Delft, I think, provides one of the first and best examples of not just a piece of infrastructure, but an entire network of infrastructure that was envisaged in the late 1970s and rolled out in the 1980s. And it was seen as a network of not just one network, one grid, but 3 different grids of 3 different sizes that would cater to a variety of trips, trip types, trip destinations. So we're talking about the trip to school, the trip to the community center, the trip to shops, restaurants, bars, and then also the trip to work. But keeping in mind all of these different places that somebody visits throughout a day. And as a result, the types of people cycling, not just the numbers of people cycling, broadened. And this is, I think, one of the most amazing things about seeing coming to the Netherlands, is seeing the variety of people cycling. It's children, it's the elderly, it's people of lower economic means, it's people with physical disabilities. The conditions are such, the network has been built to enable virtually everybody to get on a bicycle, and that really unlocks the potential for cycling as a mode of transportation, and really feeds into the local economy in a way that perhaps a car-based system does not. So when we talk about this infrastructure, I think bike parking is often one of the topics that often gets neglected and ignored. And this is a great example of my local bar in Vancouver when I was still living there. They had built some great cycling facilities there, but there was no parking provided. And so our family was forced to lock our bikes to a tree. And in a lot of cases, people just wouldn't bother. There was a study that the city of Vancouver did that found that 45% of residents were hesitant to get on a bicycle if they did not know that there was an end-of-trip facility there, a secure, safe, visible place for them to park their bike. So when we're talking about infrastructure, we can't just focus on the journey, but also we need to talk about the destination, because if people are fearing that their bike will get stolen, or they know that there isn't a safe place to lock their bike, then they may just leave their bike at home. And that is, in our view, one of the biggest tragedies or unfortunate situations. So what are the barriers to building more bicycle parking? I think one significant one is the way that retailers perhaps interpret how their customers are arriving, even without any little to no bike infrastructure. There's some great studies, these two here from San Francisco and Graz in Austria, in which the local merchants heavily overestimated the number of customers that are arriving by motor vehicle and severely underestimating the number of customers that were arriving on foot, bicycle, or public transport. And so there are things like intercept surveys that local governments can do to demonstrate to these retailers actually how their customers are arriving and help them better understand that it's not those necessarily those parking spaces, car parking spaces outside their front door that are the be all and end all, and help them to start to cater to other types of customers arriving by different modes of transportation. Again, there are all types of studies showing that the provision of bike parking, the provision of great bike infrastructure increases customer spend and the number of visitors along a given corridor. This is one in Toronto that came up fairly recently with the construction of the Bloor Street bike lane. As you can see there, the average customer spending as well as the number of customers as measured by the City of Toronto increased. Not significantly, but enough to justify that reallocation of street space and that reallocation of curb space to a more equitable balance between the various modes of transportation. This is perhaps one of the best explainers I've ever seen, and this comes from the City of Melbourne in Australia, which looks at the two uses of a traditional car parking space. If one car is sitting there for an hour, it's only generating about 27 Australian dollars over that course of that hour based on what that one customer will spend. And if you provide bicycle parking for up to 6 customers using that same space, they may spend a little bit less. They calculated here $16.20, but when you multiply that by 6, you get a significant return on just that reallocation of that one parking space. So I think these are the maths we should be doing when we're talking about reallocating space. So I'm going to touch on a few solutions that the City of Delft is using, and it's not to say that these are the solutions you should necessarily be aiming for, but just to throw some ideas out there as to what Galway might be able to utilize. This is perhaps one of the most interesting and powerful. They call it the fietsvlander, or the bicycle platform, and it's basically just a few pieces of wood and a couple of staple racks that the city will put down by request. So if local residents ask for a bicycle platform, they will put it down for 6 or 8 or 10 weeks on this street. And if it's deemed a success, if it's measured, if it's used enough, then the city will come back and re-pour the concrete curb and put permanent bicycle parking in that space. And if it doesn't work, then they will remove it, no harm, no foul, and it will be put back to its initial form. So it's a really low-risk way of trying things, and sometimes it won't work necessarily, but in a lot of cases, it does lead to meaningful and permanent change. Reallocation of retail space is another interesting thing that the City of Delft is trying. In this case, they took an old shop and they provided secure bicycle parking for up to 100 bicycles. And in this case, it is guarded by a attendant. They have specific hours, but again, if you know that place exists and that the risk of bicycle theft is relatively low, then you're perhaps more likely to enter the city center to go to the market or a restaurant or a bar during business hours. This is perhaps a bit more flashy, but an example of what is being done on the TU Delft University campus in terms of the creation of bike parking. Over 20,000 students live in Delft, and the vast majority of them, over 90%, arrive on campus by bicycle. So they created this particularly stunning 2,100 bicycle parking facility that integrated a coffee shop and a couple of other mixed uses. So there's perhaps a pretty flashy example of what can be done. IKEA is also getting in on the act, and I think this is a really great example of what's done with a relatively simple reallocation of space, but most importantly, it's right outside the front door. It's highly visible to the entrance of the shop. It is covered using those trees and vines from the elements. They do have a full-time attendant that works there to watch the bicycles and make sure they don't get stolen. And they even have 4 or 6 e-bike charging stations there for customers to take advantage of. This is another perhaps underappreciated aspect of bike parking, is the synergy between public transport and cycling. And I think one thing that Dutch cities do really well, these are all in Delft, is don't see public transport as a competitor to cycling, but as an ally. And they use bicycles to feed into the bus, train, and tram system, and actually expand the catchment area to feed more customers into the public transport network. A few words briefly on the current pandemic that we're seeing. It's obviously changed the calculus for a lot of cities. In this case, Berlin, Sydney, Milan, and Oakland. And they're reallocating space very quickly now in a more pop-up format in order to close the gap that's perhaps being lost in public transport capacity, but also create more attractive spaces for potential customers. I think one of the really shocking things we're seeing is the rise of online retail, something like 10 years of growth in 6 months. And everybody can now get virtually everything they need via a website and a few clicks of a mouse. So in order to compete, the local economy has to provide attractiveness rather than convenience, and get people out of their houses to their front door and potentially opening their wallets rather than just ordering groceries or food or whatever they need via the internet. So we always like to talk about perhaps the parallels to the 1970s, and that the Netherlands wasn't always this way. It didn't happen without a crisis of its own. In this case, the 1973 OPEC oil crisis that stripped all the cars from the streets of the Netherlands for 6 weeks, and really gave rise to a new movement of social unrest and activism, pushing back against the unsafe conditions on the streets and the amount of space that had been reallocated to the car. And so a lot of people point to that as a turning point for what the Netherlands has now accomplished 50 years later. But if there's one thing I can leave you with today, and especially amongst the politicians that might be tuned in, is that pushback is inevitable. And even in bicycle paradise that is the Netherlands, there were some growing pains. Retailers that were out protesting, they even in the top right corner in Den Haag paid contractors to rip out a cycle route in the middle of the night, which was quite astounding. But they were so fervently opposed to this project, they ended up getting fined, and they themselves organized their own protests and campaigns against the cycling routes. But in a lot of cases, the politicians prevailed, and they stuck to their guns, so to speak, mostly because they knew they had the support of a quiet majority. And I think in a lot of cases, we can't let the vocal minority drown out those voices of people who want more equitable and accessible streets. So that was my little whirlwind presentation. Hopefully, you learned something and were inspired by the conditions. This is Delft General Hospital, of which there are, I think, 300 or 400 bicycle parking spaces outside. It's quite an astounding sight when you actually visit it. But as I said, it didn't happen overnight. It was 50 years of fairly hard work. The Dutch Cycling Embassy, if you need to reach us, there's all the contact info. Our website is dutchcycling.nl, and be sure to give us a follow on social media. Looking forward to chatting a bit more in the Q&A. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was a wonderful presentation. I can see in the comments here people are really inspired by the stories of the Netherlands, and the sense that the Netherlands wasn't always the Netherlands when it comes to bikes. There was a series of conscious political decisions and public opinion that has created this transformational change into how people can live their lives, as you say, like safely, equitably, sustainably across the Netherlands. I see here in the comments that the Galway Cycling Campaign has made Delft as a suggested model in a number of public consultations and submissions we've made over the years. And I think it resonates with us as well as a university city, the university town. We have over about 20,000, 23,000 students at third level between NUI Galway and Galway Institute of Technology, but we don't have a 90% travelling to campus by bike. Of course, this year there will be less time on campus. That all said, health warning, Galway already is a cycling city. We're second only to Dublin in terms of the percentage of participation of walking and cycling to school, to the university, to the IT, and to work. And so there's a lot of potential here in Galway to become an easy and pleasant place for mobility. And I think that really, I was really struck by that comment as well, the idea that it's not just about cycling, it's about mobility. And we can see this actually now even here in Ireland, in Dún Laoghaire, the development of the coastal mobility route really puts at the heart the idea of mobility. So for all ages, all users, all types of mobility transport options, whether that's an electric wheelchair, an e-cargo bike, a regular push bike, an adult tricycle, a trishaw, or a balance bike for a toddler, that providing safe and easy ways to travel is really important. And as you say, again, I was really struck by that study that the mere act of seeing quality, safe, secure bike parking gets more people cycling, because it answers that question, what am I going to do about my bike? How will it be safe? So Chris, thank you so much for that. There's lots for us to chat about later in the Q&A. I'm now delighted, and very nice, I think I'm very delighted now to welcome Richard Guiney. He is CEO of Dublin Town, Dublin City's Business Improvement District. It represents over 2,500 businesses, and the organisation aims to make Dublin a vibrant and successful destination with thriving retail, hospitality and service provision businesses. Richard is recognised internationally as a place management expert, and he's a fellow of the Institute of Place Management. He currently serves on the board of the London-based Association of Town and City Management. And he'd be familiar here to Galway audiences through his former role as Director of Corporate Services with Chambers Ireland, where he represented the Irish Chamber movement at the International Chambers of Commerce and Eurochambres. And we have with us today members of Galway's Chamber of Commerce, and they're most welcome, along with a range of small business owners. So Richard, if you would like to begin, we'd love to hear what you have to say about the experience of Dublin and what we in Galway can learn from our pals just across the Shannon. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Martina. I'm delighted to be here and have the chance of having a chat with you. So first of all, declare my interest.
Richard, yeah. Sorry, Conor here. Can I just ask you to just go up to the display settings and then just to do what we did earlier on, just a little bit over to the left.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Display.
So if you just display settings up near the top left, it's a little drop down, and you should see a menu saying display settings, because it's just we're seeing the presenter notes. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're great. Yeah, just the top left of your screen. Can you see? Because I can see your cursor is now near the bottom. So if you move over to the left, yeah,
sorry,
it'll work. It'll so just move a little bit over to the left, your other left.
Okay, sorry.
So up in the very top left. Yes. Yeah, display settings.
Sorry.
Perfect. Thanks a million. Right.
Sorry.
And then duplicate. Yeah, perfect. Thanks a million.
Okay, sorry about that, folks.
No, you're great. You're fantastic. So just click on that. Yeah, perfect. Right.
Okay.
Thanks, Richard. Apologies now for interrupting you.
No, you're grand. So yeah, listen, first of all, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. First of all, I'll declare my interest. That's the bicycle that I cycle to work every day. I am a cyclist and enthusiastic about it. So I suppose one of the things that, Galway is a growing city. I think you'll have 120,000 people by 2040. One of the things that, if I could get into a time machine and change about Dublin, is the fact that we haven't got our residential densities right. It's a spread out city, and that makes sustainable transport that bit too much hassle and a bit more difficult than it should be. So I think, just getting your residential densities and having planning which takes into account transport and mobility is the way forward. And the other thing I think in Ireland as well is that we too often present our opinions as facts. And as Bloomberg said, in God we trust, everyone else must bring the data. And I think when you look at the data, I think it'll certainly help us make the arguments that I think we all want to make. So in terms of Dublin, this just shows you the numbers of people and the way they get into Dublin city centre. And we differentiate between commuters and customers. So commuters are people who are coming to work. They have to be in a specific place at a specific time. Customers have choices. And that does determine, to a certain extent, their behaviours and the choices that they make. So if you look at the numbers there, you'll see that in terms of customers, just over 2/3 of the customers who come to Dublin use public transport, whereas just over half of the commuters use public transport. And you'll see there that commuters are more inclined to use their cars, and I think that's a reflection of the fact that there are actually more free car parking spaces provided to public servants in Dublin than there are paid car parking spaces provided to customers. I suppose the number that we're kind of keen on there is to look at is bicycle. So only 3% of our customers come in by bicycle and 6% of our commuters. And I'm quite optimistic that we can improve those numbers and improve them quite significantly if we make the right decisions. And as has been said, one of the key things that I think that is a barrier, not just I think the research actually tells us, is that cycling is not as safe as it should be as vulnerable road users. And yesterday I was actually on a talk in Paris La Défense on encouraging people to use their bicycles for business purposes. And one of the other speakers was Morgan Cabell, who's a former mayor of Copenhagen. And while he was mayor, they invested obviously heavily in bicycle infrastructure. And he said even as a bicycle enthusiast, he'd be a bit nervous about cycling in Dublin because we basically put people in bus lanes. And I know personally, my wife, my son and my wife are keen cyclists, and my wife's work was my son's primary school was on my wife's way to work, but they didn't cycle because of a nervousness of actually bringing them through bus lanes and across dangerous junctions. So I think this is something that we are getting right in Dublin. Belatedly, we're getting right. And I actually think once we get it right, we're going to see a very significant improvement in the numbers cycling, both as customers and as commuters. Shout out to John Leary, as has been mentioned. If you're up in Dublin with your bike, do take that cycle route across the coastal route there. And it does give a light to the fact that, to the statement that people make that if you allocate space from cars to bicycles, you're going to end up with a dead town. If you're there at the weekend, the place is hopping. And we've been out a few times, and it's, it is a really vibrant space. It has also been mentioned as well, look, we're about future-proofing our cities, and we're going through very rapid change in cities as we speak. Retail has been in retreat for quite some time, not just because of online selling, but people are buying less material goods and spending more money on experiences. And that will impact on what they want out of their town centres. So the image in front of you there is of the proposal for a plaza on Liffey Street. And this is something that, if you present this to our younger members, members under the age of 40, they're going to be really enthusiastic and really excited about. You present it to an older retailer, perhaps somebody over the age of 60, and they're horrified, and they're saying this will kill the town. And you do have to kind of balance up those views. But when you look to what the public wants, the public get incredibly enthusiastic about having those kind of spaces. And as Chris was saying, you need to create spaces that people want to be in. Shopping, if you want whatever you want, you can buy it online. But to get people shopping in your towns, you need to give them a reason to be there and a place that they're going to feel comfortable in. And our towns will compete with parks in terms of leisure activities. But as I say, if you look at what the public feel about this, so we asked, we got Red Sea to ask the population about their views of Liffey Street, and we explained that the access to car parks is going to be made more difficult, and exactly how it would be made more difficult, and that a round trip might add a kilometre onto their journey. But they still said by a factor of 5 to 1 that this is something that they wanted and something that they were very enthusiastic about. And we also asked about the south side, where we're pedestrianising streets and creating more a friendly, customer-friendly environment. And again, they were equally enthusiastic, factors of 4 and 5 to 1. But actually, one of the interesting things for retailers is that the people most enthusiastic are the better off. They're the ones that are going to get most excited. So when we translated it into pounds, shillings and pence, or euros, we came up with a factor of nearly 10 to 1, or just over 10 to 1, in terms of the impact on spend. So as I say, providing data can help make the argument. And another argument against a lot of this is that, you know, people will just, they'll drive their cars, but they'll just drive them to other locations. So we asked that question of Dubliners. There's a lot of data in this, but if you just look at on the chart, the bottom bar, 17% said they would choose to go somewhere else. But when we actually dug into that 17%, we found that over a quarter of them hadn't been in the city for over 2 years. So the people who are least enthusiastic about what's being proposed are not our customer base, they're the people who don't come to the city anyway. And the Liffey cycle route, I think this is one where we got the messaging probably wrong. It was the public heard this as an anti-car rather than a pro-cycling message, and I think this, you know, this has been a saga in Dublin for 8 years, and we just need to. It took us a long time to actually develop this, but I think on this one, we got our communications wrong, and I think there's an important message in this for all of us, that to present the positive message of a pro-cycling measure and make sure that it doesn't come across as just an anti-car measure. You'll have seen in the numbers that more people still driving to Dublin than bike, and I think they're the people that we need to win over. Just very quickly, since COVID, our footfall the week before last, we were at 63% of our 2019 levels. But I want to go a little bit further into this. So the modes of transport have changed. People are using less public transport. But if you look at the two charts here, about a quarter of our office workers are back working in their offices. So, you know, at peak periods and the peak commuter period, the number cycling is at about 42% of what it was last year. But if you look at the chart beside it, that's people cycling at leisure time, and that's 10% higher than it was in 2019. Now that gives me enormous enthusiasm and optimism, because if people are cycling in their leisure period, then that means we can get them into the city as customers. And with the measures that are making cycling safer, and I should have said, in fairness to Dublin City Council, there's a lot of effort going into looking at the cycle routes into the city, and I think that's, you know, that is going to make it a more viable option. But I think we can encourage more people to come in as customers. And again, if you look at that trend, I think when we get back to work fully, more people will choose to cycle in. So look, in terms of the lessons, the main one is to listen to the public and residents and to communicate with them. We're at the early stage of this journey. We will have opposition, and we need to bring as many people with us. That means we need to make alliances and reach out to others and convince them of our arguments. And I think key to that will be not making it a cars versus bikes argument, but a pro-bike argument. I think we can use our on-street parking. So again, we know that, you know, roughly 1/5 of our customers come in by car, of which in around a quarter of that 1/5 will come in, will want to have on-street parking, which basically gobbles up a lot of space. But not only that, it means that you can't create the kind of zones that we need to create. So look, I'm fully convinced that we need to be turning them into parklets. As Chris said, you can fit 6 bicycle spaces into each of those car parking spaces. And I know the conversation is happening in Dublin as well about turning parts of the multi-storey car parks, the ground floors, into bike parking. It's worked in Drury Street, and I think that should be rolled out into other spaces. The last thing I'll say is, I'd love to have this conversation further. We've spoken to An Post about having deliveries from the city out to the suburbs, having a standard box, standard fee, and basically having, we've all got post offices in our towns and cities, and having that stuff delivered. Now that I delivered out, that be paid for by the retailers or the customers, but I think that will really help us in terms of driving sustainable transport. So having people come in on their bicycle, sauntering around, being willing to spend more, knowing that the stuff is going to be delivered to their homes, and enjoying their time when they're in the city. So that's it from me. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. The chat section here has been hopping. You've really got people talking. I think there's large amount of resonances between what you've been talking about and what the ambassador and what Chris have been talking about. And the key words jumping out for me are maybe three: listening, everybody listening and communicating. And secondly, that this is, when we talk about cycling, and we're actually not talking about machines. It's not about the machines, whether it's a bike or a car. It's about people, and it's about experiences. And the larger question that we're wrapped around in is, what is the kind of town, what is the kind of city, what is the kind of community centre hub that we want to have? And as you say, giving people reasons to leave their homes, to go from their front door and to go to someplace, a destination that's attractive, and to spend money and to keep that money local. And we all know, especially these days, that with, as you say, the ease of access, you just go click, click, click on your computer at home, and to give people a reason to come into not only just your business, but the business in which you're in, the town, the hub, the centre that you have your business located at. So I think that's really, really powerful. It's jumped up a lot. And also I'm very interested in this age perception gap. So we might come back to the Q&A. Also just now at the end of Richard's presentation, I was really struck on the use of, we want to move away from kind of military language. We're not interested in battles or wars or anything like that. You know, most people cycling also drive. And so we're really about making it, want to make cycling a real and safe choice for people of all ages and all abilities. And this is why I'm so excited to introduce to you all this afternoon, Clodagh Callanan. She works with Development Associations of Ireland, at the Development Studies Association of Ireland at Trinity College, Dublin. And she's a wonderful storyteller of the lived experience of somebody with mobility issues and who has advocated for what we think is, what we're pretty confident is, the world's first inclusive bike parking at Trinity College, which was installed last year, and according to very high standards for inclusive bike parking. So Clodagh, welcome. Tell us your story. Tell us actually how we can do this.
Thanks, Martina, and thanks very much to Galway and Dublin Cycling Campaign for organising today's webinar. Just to give you a bit of background about myself, I'm from Roscommon, but I went to college in Galway, so I'm very familiar with the city and really enjoyed my time there. I didn't actually start cycling until I moved to Dublin, and it's funny, when I go back to Galway since, I noticed the increase in cyclists as a mode of transport and leisure and commuting and everything. So I moved to Dublin then, and I started cycling for leisure reasons, but also to commute. And I was just thinking about what I was going to say today, and in relation to cycling and business and parking in particular. And I was reminded of, it was a sunny afternoon in Dublin about 3 years ago, and I went in, as people do, looking to spend my money. I think I had 2 items to exchange at an establishment just off Grafton Street. And I looked around for a place to park my bike. And as people who are familiar with Dublin may be aware, things have improved slightly, but Grafton Street and its environs is very badly served by bike parking. So every spot that I could find was full. So I spotted, as a lot of people are kind of forced to do, a lamppost just across from where I was going to go. But unfortunately at the side of it was a board, one of those A boards. And the owner of the shop came out, and I was trying to move it to park the bike. And anyway, we had a little chat, and so anyway, I got to park my bike and go and do my business. I spent about 5 minutes, and I came back out again, and I moved the A board back. But I suppose the point there is really that, I mean, we were both causing an obstruction, but I didn't have anywhere to park my bike, and the owner was trying to make a living, trying to attract his customers in. And so, as Martina mentioned, there's a kind of, it shouldn't be a competing thing, but rather that we complement each other. And so that was kind of an example where most people want to come in, they want to park up their bikes safely and securely, and especially now with the increase in cyclists. The other challenge, which is particularly, I suppose, unique to myself, but is not uncommon, is where people use bicycles for a mode of transport, you know, for mobility challenges. I myself I'm waiting on a hip replacement. So since I started cycling in Dublin 12 years ago, it has become more of a means of transport to get around until it can be a bit of a challenge. So the first thing I look for when I go into town is where is the nearest place to park my bicycle to get where I want to get. And as Chris alluded to, the destination is as important as the journey. So when I get there, when anyone gets there, ability or disability, you want to be able to park your bike in a safe, secure place, reasonably close to the establishments that you want to go to and spend your money in. And as Chris mentioned, a lot of people are going online now. So the more ways we can encourage people to have a place to park their bike and spend their money in town, the better. Then just moving on from that, about 2 years ago, I moved out to the suburbs and my commute is about 10 kilometres. And I invested in an e-bike, which revolutionised my travel. I bought a fold-up bike, but I found I couldn't get a seat on public transport. So the e-bike has really opened up that commuting aspect to me. But with that, it's brought its challenges, and with anybody, nobody wants to get their bike stolen, but certainly if you invest in an e-bike, the need for safe and secure parking is even more important, I would think. So I was attending, luckily enough, I go to a place, my workplace has secure bike parking for the most part, but I was going to training in a hotel related to my work in town. And I parked in Drury Lane car park, and that was mentioned there, Kevin mentioned, and it's a great, Richard, it's a great facility, and it's a pity there's not more of it in Dublin City, the south side of the city, sheltered and safe and secure. So I parked up there, but I found, and it's kind of linked in with my own mobility issues, the walk to the hotel was a little bit too long for me, I realised when I got there. And I said to myself, for the second day of the training, I really need to see if the underground car park is available, that I can actually park my bicycle in a safe place down there. So I organised that. I spoke to the receptionist, and the manager there was very helpful, and I was able to leave my bike downstairs the following morning. But what I did notice was that there was no bike parking. I managed to kind of lock it to something, an object, but there was not any designated bike parking. And it got me thinking about, and when I was thinking about today and what I was going to say, businesses also has workers as well. You know, businesses are workplaces. They're places where people come to work, they commute to work. And the need for actually designated bike parking for staff is really important. And those needs are different to somebody who, the likes of myself, who nipped into that shop to exchange my goods. I was 5 minutes there. I moved along and I went about my business, versus somebody who goes to work in a shop, in a hotel, in a law firm, whatever kind of business it is. They're a different profile to a customer. They're an actual worker, and they cannot leave their bike with good conscience, particularly in most parts of Dublin City, regrettably, and go to work and think that it's going to be there when they arrive out 8 hours later. So it kind of negates the kind of dopamine release you get and the benefit from cycling if you're actually worried that when you come out of your workplace, your bike isn't going to be there anymore. And there has been, I think, and recently the government increased the threshold for the purchase of e-bikes to €1,500 and for normal bikes to €1,250. So that's an incentive, I think, partly brought about by COVID, that it will encourage people to actually buy bikes, because people now don't want to be travelling by public transport. They need to commute to work by other means, but they also need to have a place to park their bike safely. And I do think Dublin City Council or Galway County Council have a role around providing bike parking for customers, for tourists, for the citizens, but equally private businesses also have a role to play in ensuring that their customers have bike parking. And I do see there was an initiative recently by Dublin City Council for businesses to ask for Sheffield bike parking if they wanted it outside their business, which is a good initiative. But equally, businesses have, I think, a duty to their staff to try and encourage them to cycle to work as well, and that the bike parking needs to be in a different place than outside the place of work. It's not always practical, it's not always possible, but certainly there is a need for a designated staff parking where possible around the back, or Richard mentioned initiatives to convert underground car parking spaces into bike parking spaces, so that people can actually travel on their bike, their e-bike, whatever bike they use to work, and park it up safely. So that's really all I kind of wanted to say. I know time is running out. I do think that the statistics are important, but I guess, you know, the lived experience as well, as Martina says, we're people, we're cycling, and I think the relationship can be symbiotic rather than a kind of competing, because that's the way it's going now, and certainly in the short term, it doesn't look like people will want to be on their bikes and walking more so than has been in the past. So that's really all I kind of wanted to say, and thanks very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Clodagh. I think you've offered some really valuable insight into what it means for, you know, different kinds of people cycling, different type of bike users, and that's something we're all very keen to support here in the Galway Cycling Campaign, and our kind of our sister cycling, everyday cycling groups across the country. We're really passionate about this idea that cycling is for all ages, all abilities, from kids on bands bikes to older adults on adult trikes, that we're talking about how we move through our towns, cities and villages, and that this should be a safe and real easy choice for people to make, and to reduce barriers to participation where possible. So thank you so much for that contribution. It's really valuable. I'm conscious that we're only a couple of minutes officially left within this webinar. I do want to get some questions, and if it's okay with everybody attending and with our guests, I might run over by 5 minutes or so, if that's all right. We've had a lot of questions to get through here. There's been a lot of comments and excited and detailed questions in the chat. I would like to perhaps begin with Chris. Like Delft, Galway is a city full of waterways, and we have a large number of canals here in our city. And so the key geographical feature of Delft is this large canal. Can you tell us a bit about the process of creating safer transport zones along the canal system in Delft? And maybe there's something here in Galway we could take away from that.
Yeah, it's a great story. And when we moved to Delft, well, as you go anywhere in the Netherlands, you assume that the conditions were always that way. And it was actually only as recently as 2003 that the center of Delft was made what they call low car or nearly car free, using the old fortress walls of the medieval center as kind of the perimeter of that. But the intention was to make the city center more attractive, more livable, give more space to the bars and restaurants for terraces. So they removed a lot of the surface parking, and shockingly, a lot of the beautiful historic squares where these 500-600-year-old churches were facing, as recently as 2003, were surface parking lots. So part of it was removing the parking from the center, not removing it entirely, but placing it in multi-story car parks around the perimeter of the city center, and then only restricting access to either residents or freight and service vehicles that have an appointment. So if you want to enter the center of Delft, you have to book an appointment on their website, and they have a series of cameras around the perimeter. There's only, because of the old fortress center, only 5 or 6 places where you can enter with a car. And if your license plate is not registered as a resident or a service vehicle that's booked an appointment, you will be sent a hefty fine in the mail. And so as a result, you know, the center is really a remarkable place, and we find ourselves walking, you know, shopping, cycling, spending all kinds of time there. And but it was only, you know, 17 years ago that was established, and prior to that, a lot of the city center was dedicated to car movement and storage.
Wow, that's a really interesting story. Kind of aligned to that point, and a question for the ambassador. There's been a lot of chat about and kind of what Richard's brought up, but to the ambassador, any advice on or suggestions, best practices of this idea of communications, of engagement between the town gown retailers and residences, and between our executive council staff around creating processes of engagement? So you talk about the Netherlands has a Dutch cycling plan with all the key stakeholders involved. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Well, more in general, what I can say is we are very much a consensus-built society in the Netherlands. For example, we have a national climate action plan, and the targets in the climate action plan per sector are, for example, in agriculture, you have the environmental sector and the agricultural sector, the financial people, the governments, all sitting together and coming to a conclusion, this is our joint target. This is what we realize together. And it's the same when it comes to cycling. You should start to look at what is the best solution on the parking platforms for bicycles. In my hometown, they basically had something where they had the bike organization, the municipal government, the restaurant people sitting together. Okay, what is the best place to put it up? And what problems are we trying to address? And so it's really an open dialogue where you not just say, this is the plan, do you agree or not? But in an earlier stage, almost you start coming to bring people together to get mutual understanding. And once that mutual understanding is there, and then sometimes it is indeed a question of looking for interest. Very simply put, you do not increase the overall spending of people and the overall income by putting a bicycle parking somewhere. No, what you do is you make it more attractive for people. And like what was earlier said, why do you move people out of the cars out of the city center? You make it more attractive, more livable. And the bicycle parking also basically means that you save time. You know where you park, and so there is maybe that you do not see an increase immediately in spending, but you will see an increase in people's pleasure and indirectly in people's long-term income.
That's a really excellent point. I think, to be honest, that's one of the reasons why I started cycling regularly about that, is around reliable journey times and time. So I am a half-hour walk from Galway city centre. It is 10 minutes on the bike. Not waiting for buses. I'm independent. It's cheap, and I think that's becoming more attractive and more understood by wider numbers of people. Thanks to that perspective, Ambassador. Kind of tying in here, I want to go back to Richard and destination, and tying actually a question around, I guess around largely, as you're an expert in placemaking and urban development, around if you could talk to a little bit about how to densify our city centres, our retail space, and to create spaces where people want to come into, so that parking, whether it's for your bike or your car or for buses, we don't quite have trains and trams here in Galway like Dublin and other cities have, but how this then can actually support the creation of attractive destinations, whether it's in a city centre or in a series of urban villages around a larger place. Can you talk a little bit about that, please, Richard?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Martina. We're going to see changes in how people use urban centres, and we're going to see more residential uses in urban centres as people want to be able to walk or cycle to work. We've loads of space above the shop that we, right across the country that we haven't utilised properly, and I think we need to be a bit more imaginative about that. In Dublin, we've got back lanes that were originally where stables were. And they're just used for antisocial behaviour, but the space is there to actually develop for residential use, and I think that's something that we absolutely have to be looking at. I think we can, as I say, we do need to keep some car access to our town centres, but the car doesn't need to be on every street. People are generally comfortable enough in moving 250 to 500 metres from where they either get off public transport or park their bicycle or car. So we can create much more attractive spaces, and more people dined in Dublin pre-COVID than shopped in Dublin. So people will shop, as Chris was saying, people will shop and socialise and use cities to meet their friends to a far greater extent than would have been the case 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And actually, I think urban centres are going back to a pre-industrial revolution use, where they are social spaces where we do meet people. We will shop while we're there. There's an opportunity for doing that. But I think we need to look at the holistic use of our towns and cities. And I think, we need to be that bit more clever. And one thing I suppose, to a certain extent in the debate we're having now, is that we're being late to the game has its advantages, because we can look at the things that have worked well in other locations and mimic them to and borrow some ideas. So I think that's something that we do need to do, and I think the Netherlands is obviously a very good example, and I think Denmark as well are two countries where I think we can learn a lot from.
Thank you. I think you've kind of hit on the nail the head there, or to use a pun, to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to do that. The engineering, the technology, the urban design knowledge, it exists in the world. So it's really about empathy, I think, and making choices over what we value, and then aligning public policy. And as Ambassador has talked about, plans and targets and stakeholder involvement, so that we're all pointing the bike, so we're in the same direction. Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Richard. A question now for Clodagh, and I think a lot of our people here in the chat, there's a lot of chat about and questions about policy and standards and targets, and what can be done from the state's point of view to help create more cycle-friendly, walking-friendly, mobility-friendly spaces in our towns, villages and cities. So in advance of tomorrow, which is Make Way Day, and there'll be a lot of talk over the next 24 hours in particular around trip hazards and barriers to people walking and moving about our towns and cities. And Clodagh, like we all know, routes need to be unobstructed and safe, and particularly for people with mobility challenges who use a wide variety of mobility aids, and also parents with small children, buggies and pushchairs. Could you talk about, please, kind of policies? What kind of policies would you like to see happen to ensure that we're calling vulnerable road users can feel safe to move around, to make a choice to move by bike, to go to shop, to go in and go for dinner or grab a coffee later this evening? What kind of policies and what can the state do to really help us?
Well, I think the bike parking for sure is a good start, but also, I mean, the journey as well as the destination, and I've noticed a lot of, some of it is of course band-aid solutions, but I would hope that the policy where there has been cycle lanes that have had those barriers put up, they're temporary and they're a quick solution, but that some of that has been sort of piloted now, that they will become more long-term, and that where practicable and possible, that the designation between cyclists and pedestrians can become clearer, especially for people in cars, to know that that there is a differentiation between the two. So I think infrastructure, policy around infrastructure, and that the funding is also linked in, and that there's investment made, and that the budget, the roads budget, is the cycling budget is as important, and to ensure that those initiatives are funded as well. I mean, in a city like Dublin, and I'm sure Galway has its own challenges, it's not always, I mean, most of the streets were kind of built for horses, there was never supposed to be cars kind of going down them. So there's a real competition between different road users, so there are practical challenges, but where there can be more long-term solutions, where there are opportunities, that they're taken up, because sometimes it's a bit about the optics as well, to kind of embed that culture of cycling. And if anything has come out of the last few months, it's that the actual putting up of those poles and the the decrease in parking on cycle lanes that those present has kind of created an awareness, I think, among all road users that actually, you know what, we share the road and nobody has any more right to be on it than anybody else. So I think it should follow, hopefully policy should follow, and elected representatives will hopefully take that into account. I remember when the election was on recently, I had two people come to the door and they spoke about, they were canvassing actually for somebody who has since become a high profile minister, not to do with cycling unfortunately, but I talked to them, they were telling me about the different things he was going to do when he was elected or what he's already done. And I said, well, you know, I live quite close here to Portmarnock, and there's been a wonderful cycle path that opened up there. Anyone, if they're in Dublin or should come out to visit it and use it. And it's absolutely been chock-a-block since it opened. But there was no actual cycle parking when you got further down, when you finished your journey or when you got to the beach. It never has been for years. So when they arrived at the door, I said, look, that's all great, but you know, what about cycle parking down when the greenway is finished? And I could see their eyes glazing over, you know. I just thought, oh my God, I've lost them mid-sentence, you know. But, and actually on the positive side, there has been Sheffield hooks put up in the last few weeks. So, you know what, it has, I don't think it was as a result of that conversation because they didn't have notebooks or anything with them. But I was really pleased to see that actually, you know, the cycle path came up, there's more people cycling, perhaps it was a little bit to do with COVID, and that sort of policy has almost become embedded now of when you do something infrastructurally wise, it's really positive. It should also follow that you put parking in when people use it. So I think, yeah, there is a bit to go, but I definitely think has been, certainly in Dublin anyway, there's been a lot of positive changes. And of course, in no small way due to the likes of the Dublin and the Galway cycling campaign as well.
You're very kind.
I have to say that, you know. No, absolutely, you know, absolutely. I cannot be understated.
Actually, well, I think you have a point there around. I'm really struck by a conversation like you asking a politician on the doorstep, "What are you going to do for me as somebody who moves around by bike?" And I think that's a lot of our work, and we've seen that over the last 6 months, and particularly with coronavirus and COVID-19 pandemic and the constraints people have in moving about safely, just to go to the shop to pick up your proverbial pint of milk, the newspaper and the loaf of bread. And that, you know, I think it's becoming now a more topic of public conversation, like, you know, well, why can't I cycle my bike on? And we've seen it really now in the last few weeks going back to schools. The number of children cycling to schools has just exploded across the country. The Galway cycle bus has been doing a count of children using bikes and bike parking at primary and secondary schools all across the city and county over the last 2 days, and we'll be repeating that over a couple of points in the next year and sharing results with people. But there really does seem to be more people on bikes, more people wanting to cycle to go about their everyday business. And yes, as I say, we have the engineering solutions. We would like more in the policy to help us shape the environment that we live in, but it will all come with public support. I'm going to kind of close off this Q&A on. We could stay here for a lot longer. There's so much in the question and the chat. I hope people have got a sense of what people are interested in. Before we close off, I want to just give each of our guest speakers 30 seconds close up. What are you going to take away today with you, or any kind of final words here for us here in Galway around the connection between bike parking and supporting retail in this time where lives and livelihoods are threatened, and how we can create more livable cities for all? So perhaps, Ambassador, if I'll start with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Yeah, what do I take away from this? First of all, the enthusiasm of everybody. We as Embassy, we will continue to work on the subject of cycling. We have another cycling seminar next week, more on the rural areas. And then who knows what comes after that. What I take with it is also the fact that there is, despite all the differences, a lot of things in common, which we can, from the Netherlands, bring to Ireland. And I hope that cooperation also through the Dutch Embassy, Cycling Embassy, will continue.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Now over to the Dutch Cycling Embassy. Chris Buntnett, any kind of final thoughts, takeaways or suggestions, please?
Yeah, no, it's as a Canadian that gets to live in this wonderful country every day. I mean, I always tell people it feels like I moved 50 years into the future, and to get to experience the human streets of Delft every day is really a dream come true for my own personal health, mental health, for the health of my children, their freedom and autonomy that I see them experience every day. It's really special, and it's worth fighting for. And it may take 50 years, hopefully not that long, to get to this point. You can learn from the mistakes the Dutch have made, learn from the best practice that they've built up, and hopefully we can help Galway move towards a more human city in the years and decades ahead.
Thank you so much, Chris. We'd absolutely welcome that. And to yourself and the ambassador, we'd really love this to be the start of a conversation with you over the coming months and years. And of course, just up the road, our pals in Dublin. Richard, any final thoughts from you, please?
Yeah, look, I firmly believe that environmental sustainability and economic sustainability are interlinked. Our towns and cities were going to change anyway. Pre-COVID, there was a lot of trends that we could see. COVID has accelerated those trends. So I think what we need to do is, put our thinking caps on and create spaces where people want to work, play, live, and recreate. And the future is ours.
That's a very inspiring end. Thank you, Richard. And finally, Clodagh, over to you for the last words.
Yeah, I just think, I love cycling, and the longer, the more that it can be made easier, and the more parking that increases, the more, cycle lanes, and the more people of all ages and abilities take it up, the better, because the physical and the mental advantages, the mental health advantages of it, it's non-quantifiable, and it's just something that I hope in time will become like Amsterdam someday, that our cities will, it won't be an unobtainable dream, hopefully. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Clodagh. So listen, we've run over time, and I think so I'm sorry about that, but I also think it's a good sign just how much people have to say and contribute in the multitude of perspectives, and that learning is a real option for us, and that's something hopefully that this city, this county will really, really embrace. I want to thank our guest speakers, Ambassador Pam from the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Chris Buntlett from the Dutch Cycling Embassy, Richard Guiney from Dublin Town, and Clodagh Callanan from Trinity College Dublin for being with us this lunchtime. Thanks to you all who have tuned in. We've had county engineers from county councils across Ireland, Galway Chamber, who've been supporting us in this event, our own members